You know, when we look at the origin stories of cultural icons, we generally expect to find this, like, clean, carefully drawn architectural blueprint.
Right, like we want this clear starting line where genius just, manifests exactly as planned.
Exactly. We want them to be completely fully formed from day one.
It's that mythological narrative we always crave. We want to see the master plan unfolding flawlessly from the very first sketch.
Just to prove that the icon was always destined for greatness, right?
Mhm.
But then you actually look at the real first steps of these legends, and suddenly that pristine blueprint is, I mean, it's covered in coffee stains.
Oh, absolutely.
Somebody lost the tape measure, and the foundation is actively being poured during a thunderstorm.
That is a highly accurate description of most creative breakthroughs.
Because the reality of a breakthrough is usually just completely chaotic. And today, we are welcoming you to a new deep dive where we're zooming in on one specific focused source.
Right, we're looking at a Wikipedia article on the song You're No Good by Jesse Fuller.
Yeah, and we're extracting the hidden historical gems inside it. Because our mission today isn't just looking at a piece of music.
No, not at all.
We are examining this bizarre timeline anomaly and a spectacularly messy recording session that inadvertently launched the career of one of the most famous musicians in modern history.
Bob Dylan.
Yeah, Bob Dylan. And it is, it's the absolute definition of historical whiplash.
It really is. Because the very first track Dylan ever recorded for his debut album, the literal starting line of a career that changed global culture, wasn't even his own song.
Which is wild, and the irony goes so much deeper than it just being a cover song, because the original creator of that track didn't even get to release his own version until over a year after Dylan's album came out.
Which is just a fascinating sequence of events.
Right. So, to understand the premise of Bob Dylan's massive world-shifting career, we have to connect it back to this literal starting point.
And that means we really have to start with the man who actually wrote the song, Jesse Fuller.
Right, the original creator.
Yeah.
Who was Jesse Fuller?
Well, Jesse Fuller is a monumental figure in his own right, but he was operating in a totally different universe than the one Dylan would eventually inhabit.
How so?
So, Fuller lived from 1896 to 1976. He was this older, established blues and folk musician who operated as a literal one-man band.
Like actually playing everything himself.
Exactly. And he didn't just strap a harmonica around his neck and call it a day. He actually invented a unique instrument to solve a very specific musical problem he had.
Oh wait, the fatdella.
Yes.
He called it the fatdella.
Okay, let's unpack this fatdella, because it sounds like something out of a steampunk novel.
It kind of is.
I mean, how exactly does someone build a foot-operated bass instrument from scratch in the mid-20th century?
So he essentially built this large, upright wooden box that housed 6 bass strings.
Like a piano crossed with an upright bass.
Sort of, yeah. And then he attached a pedal mechanism to it. When he pressed the pedal with his foot, it would trigger a padded piano hammer.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and that hammer struck the corresponding bass string, so this allowed him to physically play a walking bass line with his foot.
While playing other stuff.
Exactly. It left his hands completely free to play the guitar, and his mouth was free to sing, play the harmonica, or, use a kazoo.
That requires immense physical coordination. I mean, if you look at his 1963 album, San Francisco Bay Blues, which the Wikipedia article notes was supervised by Paul A. Rothschild Fuller, is credited with doing so much at once.
He was a machine.
He's credited with singing and simultaneously playing the guitar, the harmonica, the kazoo, the washboard, and this fatdella.
All at the same time.
It was like the ultimate uncompromising modern-day indie DIY artist, just building his own instruments and doing the work of 5 people.
It really makes total sense economically, too.
Oh, for sure. Why split the gig money 5 ways when you could build a contraption to do the work of an entire rhythm section yourself?
Precisely. It was an economic necessity born of a touring musician's lifestyle. And his most famous song, San Francisco Bay Blues, had already been recorded by artists like Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Donovan.
Right, but the song we are focusing on, You're No Good, is structurally very close to that hit, isn't it?
Yeah, according to author Spencer Lee, the structure is very similar.
But the narrative inside You're No Good is much darker.
Oh, definitely.
Like the narrator is complaining about a woman who, as the lyrics say, has got the ways of a devil sleeping in a lion's den.
That's such a great line.
So visceral. He talks about supporting her when she was poor, and now she takes the money he gave her and spends it on another man.
Right, complete betrayal.
Yeah, it gets to the point where the narrator says he just wants to lay down and die. It's this gritty, heavy blues story about carousing and heartbreak.
What's fascinating here is the thematic contradiction.
Contradiction how?
Well, if you read the liner notes written by Joe Boyd for that San Francisco Bay Blues album, he points out that Fuller had indeed experienced some troubled relationships before meeting his wife.
Okay, so there's some real-life inspiration.
True, but his actual personality was completely at odds with the dangerous, hard-drinking characters in his songs.
Really? So he's not this wild bluesman?
Not at all. Boyd explicitly notes that despite living a vagabond lifestyle as a traveling musician, Jesse Fuller was actually quite frugal.
Frugal?
Yeah, frugal and relatively conservative. Women who drank and caroused until the early hours never got along well with Jesse at all.
Oh, wow. So he's basically cosplaying this hardened, reckless bluesman while actually being like a highly responsible accountant type behind the scenes.
Essentially, yes. He was a professional playing a role. He was delivering a narrative that fit the expectations of the blues tradition, but he wasn't living that chaotic life himself.
Okay, so if Fuller was this frugal, responsible guy who actively avoided the party scene, how did his deeply cynical blues track end up in the hands of someone like Dylan?
Well, that's where the paths cross.
Right, this chaotic, lightning-in-a-bottle teenager. Wait, how is it possible that a cover version beats the original songwriter's version to the record store by over a year?
It sounds impossible by today's standards.
Right. I mean, Dylan recorded it in November 1961 and released it in March 1962
And Fuller's version didn't come out until May 13th, 1963.
on the Prestige Folklore label. That timeline is just completely upside down.
It is, but to make sense of that anomaly, you have to understand how information, and specifically music, actually moved in the mid-century folk scene.
It wasn't exactly digital distribution.
Far from it. You might be picturing modern music distribution where an artist finishes a song, uploads it to a streaming service, and it's copyrighted and distributed globally in an instant.
Yeah, but the folk scene of the late 50s and early 60s operated entirely outside of that corporate infrastructure.
Completely outside. It was an oral tradition.
Like an open source code network, but happening in smoky basements instead of on the internet.
That's a great way to look at it. Songs spread through live coffeehouse performances. Musicians would just watch each other play.
They'd memorize the chord progressions?
Yeah, the chords, the lyrics, and then they'd take those songs to the next town. The sources indicate Dylan actually learned You're No Good, personally, from Jesse Fuller.
After seeing him perform at the Exodus Coffee Club in Denver in 1959.
Exactly.
Though, the notes do mention a slight debate that Dylan might have heard Ramblin' Jack Elliott perform it instead, right?
There's a footnote about that, yes.
Yeah.
But the consensus heavily leans toward Dylan absorbing it directly from Fuller in Denver.
Gotcha. So why the massive delay in Fuller's release?
It really comes down to the stark difference in their career phases.
Because Fuller was already established.
Right. He was an older touring musician. His primary income was playing live gigs. Releasing records was just an occasional byproduct of his touring, not the main engine.
Oh, so Prestige Folklore probably just recorded him when he rolled through town.
Exactly, and then they simply held onto the tapes until it made financial sense for the label to press them into vinyl.
Whereas Bob Dylan was this hungry, fast-moving sponge. He's just soaking up everything he hears in these coffee houses.
And immediately sprinting into the studio to put it on tape to establish his own name.
Sprinting is definitely the word. Which brings us to the chaos of November 20th, 1961.
Ah, yes. Columbia Studio A.
Located at 799 7th Avenue in New York City. This is the very first track Dylan recorded at his initial session.
For his debut album, yes.
And we really have to contextualize what Studio A actually was at that time.
Because it wasn't what people might think.
Right, you might be picturing a grungy, relaxed rehearsal space with tapestries on the walls. But Columbia Studio A was a pristine, union-regulated, white lab coat environment in the heart of Midtown Manhattan.
It was incredibly formal.
So imagine dropping a scruffy, unpredictable 19-year-old folk singer into a sterilized corporate laboratory. Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's like a corporate manager trying to put a spreadsheet together during a tornado.
The clash of cultures was immediate. The session was produced by John H. Hammond,
Who was a legend.
absolute legend at Columbia Records. He had discovered artists like Billie Holiday, but he was used to a certain standard of studio decorum and strict technical methodologies.
And according to Dylan biographer Clinton Halen, who actually had access to the unreleased session tapes, Hammond struggled terribly with the young Dylan.
Terribly. Halen claims that from the very first take, Hammond was, quote, all at sea.
It took them 8 takes just to get this one short song down.
Yeah, 4 complete takes and 4 false starts, eventually using take 5.
And the core issue was Hammond trying to apply traditional recording techniques to an entirely untraditional artist.
Right, because in 1961, if a take wasn't perfect, a producer couldn't just digitally fix a mistake in Pro Tools.
No, they had to use physical tape splicing.
Exactly. An engineer would take a razor blade, physically cut the magnetic audio tape from take 1, cut the tape from take 2, and literally stitch the best halves together to create a flawless master track.
But Halen notes that physical splicing was practically impossible with Dylan because his sound varied so wildly from take to take.
He didn't play to a click track?
No. His tempo shifted, his vocal delivery changed, his guitar strumming was erratic. It's like trying to tailor a bespoke suit for someone who won't stop sprinting around the room.
That's exactly it. Hammond's tools, like the careful microphone placement, the tape splicing, they rely on a stationary, predictable subject.
And Dylan was a moving target.
He really was. You have these professional engineers, George Neuer and Pete Doria, frantically trying to fix the audio balance on the fly, while Dylan is just blasting away.
Didn't Hammond have to stop him mid-song at one point?
Yeah. He had to stop Dylan after a take and ask him to play it again specifically because they were still trying to fix the balance.
And Dylan wasn't making it any easier on the technical side either. Hammond kept complaining over the intercom because Dylan was popping his P sounds on the microphone.
Oh, the P sounds.
Yeah, there's a line where he sings the word planes, and Dylan is just leaning way too hard into the mic. I can just picture Hammond, this distinguished industry veteran, rubbing his temples in the control room while the audio leaders peek into the red.
It was a frustrating environment for Dylan, too, though.
Oh, and sure.
He actually originally wanted to use a spoken word introduction to the song.
About what?
About a cowboy in Connecticut.
Wait, a cowboy in Connecticut? That has absolutely nothing to do with a devilish woman stealing your money in a blues song.
It really didn't make thematic sense.
At all.
But it was part of that rambling persona he was developing. However, he had to abandon that entire cowboy monologue simply because of all the interruptions from the control room during the early takes.
Wow, so the studio tensions literally changed the structure of the track. Now, I should mention, not everyone agrees it was a total disaster.
Right.
The scholar Todd Harvey pushes back on Halen's narrative of complete studio chaos, doesn't he?
He does. Harvey argues that the session tapes actually corroborate Hammond's own view.
Which was?
Hammond suggested that Dylan just needed a few minutes to adjust to the formal recording process.
Okay.
So Harvey's perspective is that it wasn't a catastrophic failure of communication. It was just a raw, live performer taking a few takes to calibrate to the sterile environment of Studio A.
But wait, I really have to push back on Harvey's theory there.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was just a simple adjustment period, Dylan wouldn't have kept popping his PS, Hammond wouldn't have been complaining over the intercom constantly, and they still would have been able to splice the tape eventually.
That's a fair point.
The fact that the tape was fundamentally unspliceable tells me this wasn't just a quick calibration. This was a fundamental clash of recording philosophies. Dylan's entire approach was about capturing a raw moment, and Hammond's approach was about constructing a polished product.
That is a crucial distinction. And whatever friction occurred in that room, the result, which was take 5, survived.
It did.
But it is structurally and tonally very different from Jesse Fuller's version.
It's completely transformed. I mean, Dylan speeds the whole thing up. His version clocks in at a brisk 1 minute and 40 seconds.
It goes by in a flash.
He takes this steady, rhythmic folk blues song and injects it with, like, punk rock pacing.
And he also alters the lyrics. For instance, he drops a great line from Fuller's original version.
Which one?
Fuller sings that the woman could make a preacher lay his Bible down.
Oh, that's such a fantastic blues lyric. It's a shame to lose it.
It is, but Dylan was filtering the song through his own frantic energy. And despite eventually getting the track on tape, the record label still managed to bungle the commercial release.
Oh, of course they did. How?
On some of the American pressings and the British LP, the track was mistakenly labeled as She's No Good instead of You're No Good.
A classic record label maneuver. Just print the sleeves, we'll fix the typo on the second pressing.
Exactly.
Although they did manage to get the historical credit right on the back of the album. The liner notes were written by the critic Robert Shelton.
Who was using a pseudonym, right?
Yeah, he used the pseudonym Stacy Williams. And Shelton explicitly credited Dylan's learning of the song from, quote, Jesse Fuller, the West Coast blues singer.
And Shelton's involvement highlights just how polarized the critical reaction to this 1 minute and 40-second piece of tape would be.
Oh, the critical divide was massive.
Because when the album dropped, The music establishment really didn't know what to do with it.
Let's look at the old guard first. You have William Allen reviewing the album in the Pittsburgh Press in June 1962.
Right.
And he is actively hostile to what Dylan is doing. He actually puts the word singing in quotation marks when talking about Dylan.
Just completely sneering at it.
Yeah.
Because to William Allen and the established critics of the time, singing meant Frank Sinatra. It meant Bing Crosby.
The crooners.
Yeah, it meant hitting notes with perfect, practiced intonation.
Right. Allen specifically singles out You're No Good as a song that didn't have a publisher and, in his words, wasn't likely to have one.
That comment about the publisher is incredibly revealing.
Why is that?
It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the tectonic shift happening in music at that exact moment. Allen is evaluating the song through the lens of Tin Pan Alley.
For those who might not know, what exactly does that mean?
So Tin Pan Alley was the traditional corporate music publishing industry centered in New York. Their business model relied on professional songwriters creating sheet music.
Okay.
And publishers could sell that sheet music to other artists to record cleanly and politely.
I see.
Allen is listening to Dylan's track and thinking, no one can print this erratic performance onto sheet music and sell it. He's evaluating it as a reproducible product, completely missing that Dylan is selling raw, unvarnished emotion and energy.
He was completely missing the forest for the trees. But on the flip side, you have Robert Shelton, the same guy who wrote the liner notes under a fake name, praising the track to the moon in his later biography of Dylan.
What did he say about it?
Shelton calls it a rollicking tumble of witty nonsense. And I love how he describes the instrumental break. He points out that Dylan basically built his own one-man band in the studio.
Which is a great spiritual nod to Jesse Fuller's Fatilla.
Exactly. Shelton highlights the galloping mouth harp that talks back and forth with the guitar.
The critics who got it really got it. Another author, John Nogowski, was a bit more analytical.
How did he rate it?
He rated the energetic performance a solid C+.
Fair enough.
But Paul Williams, who is a prominent rock critic, saw something much deeper beneath the surface. He felt that You're No Good was one of the only tracks on that debut album that gave early hints of Dylan's underlying rock and roll sensibilities.
Williams makes such a great observation here. He points out that for all of Dylan's later reputation, this debut album doesn't really portray him as a dangerous rock star or a philanderer.
No, it's mostly traditional folk songs.
Right. Williams argues that the only truly sexy, dangerous line on the entire album is right here in You're No Good.
Which line is that?
It's when Dylan speeds up and sings, "When you get a crazy notion jumping all over me."
Which perfectly leans into that rock and roll energy. It pushes the boundaries of the polite folk revival just a little bit, hinting at the electric controversies that Dylan would spark a few years later.
So what does this all mean? We have a 1 minute and 40-second song that some critics dismissed as unpublishable garbage, while others saw it as the vanguard of a new era.
It's a true dividing line.
And honestly, the irony of William Allen dismissing the song's viability aged terribly.
Terribly.
Especially when you consider that as recently as 2022, Jeff Hanna of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, who's been a massive fan since that first album dropped, specifically singled out this track in an interview.
Oh, really?
Yeah, saying Dylan, quote, sings the heck out of that one.
It proves that raw energy outlasts polite precision. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Todd Harvey has a very grounded theory about why the song was placed where it was.
Why open your monumental debut album with someone else's song?
Right. Harvey believed it wasn't necessarily because it was a profound lyrical masterpiece. It was chosen simply because it was upbeat, funny, and possessed incredible forward momentum.
It was just a great opener to grab the listener by the collar.
It doesn't always have to be deep. Sometimes you just want to kick the door down and start the record with some heat.
Exactly. But historically, it serves as this beautiful accidental bridge. On one side, you have the old acoustic oral tradition of the blues represented by the frugal, ingenious one-man band Jesse Fuller.
And on the other side,
you have the electric sped-up rock and roll revolution that Bob Dylan was about to ignite. This frantic track is the exact intersection where those two eras collide.
It really is the perfect pivot point in music history.
Which brings us back to you listening to this right now. You might be wondering why a deep dive into an obscure cover song from 1962 matters for your life today.
It's a fair question.
I think it's a powerful, tangible reminder that monumental, culture-shifting careers, the kind that change the trajectory of the world, rarely start with a flawless, completely original masterpiece.
They usually start with a mess.
Yeah. If you are out there trying to build something, trying to lay down the blueprint for your own career or project, remember what Dylan's day one looked like.
Right.
It started with a fast, slightly altered cover of a Frugal Guy's unreleased song. It started with a studio session full of false starts, popping PS on a microphone, and a distinguished producer rubbing his temples in frustration because he couldn't slice your tape with a razor blade.
It started with an abandoned, rambling monologue about a cowboy in Connecticut.
Yes. Your first attempt does not have to be perfect, pristine, or even entirely original to be historically significant. You just have to get your energy on tape.
The messy reality of the creative process is often what gives it life. But as we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with one final lingering mystery to mull over on your own.
Ooh, what's that?
We've established that You're No Good was the very first song recorded for Bob Dylan's debut album. It was an energetic track that literally launched his recording career, serving as that crucial stepping stone between the old acoustic world and the new era of rock.
The ultimate day one foundation.
Precisely. And yet, despite its undeniable historical importance as the spark that started his catalog, as of 2022, Bob Dylan has never played the song live in a public concert.
Wait, really? Not a single time?
Not a single time.
Wait, in over 60 years of touring, he has never played the very first song he recorded?
Never. Which leaves us to ponder, why?
Yeah, why?
Why would an artist completely abandon the very first stone they laid in the foundation of their legendary career? Is it a conscious rejection of the past?
Maybe.
Was the song just a stepping stone he didn't feel the need to revisit once the skyscraper was built? Or does it just remind him too much of popping peas in Columbia Studio A?
That is absolutely something to think about the next time you look back at the messy starting line of your own journey. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.